It happened when I was on my way home from the flea market across state lines. I sell things I make out of junk mostly. The term is trash sculptures in the community I belong to, but I never liked that term. Some may call this junk, but to me, they're treasures. I make all kinds of things, from stuff I find at the dump. People, vehicles, animals, whatever catches my eye. They sell pretty good, but not in my home state. I usually end up driving to Sadie's Flea Market, one of these huge, sprawling outdoor markets in Alabama, to sell my wares. The people there love them, and today was the first time in a while that I've come home with anything. I was loading the sitter into the back of my truck as the sun went down. I had made him out of rebar and old license plates. He was definitely unique looking. I had some lookers, but he was a little heavy for my usual crowd. The sitter was what you would call an end-of-the-day purchase, to be sure, and no one was buying him today. I sat him in the back of the truck and grinned as he sort of looked like he was just sitting there, just resting in the bed of the truck after a long day of being on display. With my passenger secured, I cleaned up my stall and rolled out of the parking lot just as it was starting to get dark. The road was busy, but not overly so. It's about an hour to my house through some pretty rural countryside. I never minded. It's a pretty soothing view as you roll along towards the Florida-Alabama line. Most of the route is roadside stands, abandoned buildings, gas stations, and the ever-popular fireworks stand. It's hard to explain, but it always seems so desolate out here. A single pole light shining beside the shell of an abandoned house, an old store that's slowly being retaken by the woods, a rotting cooler that someone had left by the roadside, its mouth wide open and its insides scummy. These were little things that reminded me that humanity had once had hope for these places that are out of the way, and it made me wish I had the skill to use a camera properly. Some artistic type would probably have paid a mint for pictures of some of these things. As I drove, I saw other people getting ready to leave. The sun was setting, and it washed them out in a way that's hard to explain. It's strange, but the setting sun always seems to gray these people a little, making them look like actors in an early 90s show. The sunset seems to bleed all the color out of them, and it's kind of nostalgic for me. It always seemed comfortable. At least, it did until today. As I drove for the state line, the sun turned the trees into a fiery corona, a forest fire that burned on and on until it was snuffed out with the eventual setting of the sun. It started rather subtly. I had chalked it up to the sun, having gone down when I first noticed it. But as I drove past a familiar barn, I had to double-take. The barn was old, older than me probably, but it looked like something drawn in a sketchbook. It's hard to put into words, but it just looked flat and unfinished. As I watched, the light on the barn threw only a small circle of illumination, and the yard itself looked grainy and unreal. I watched as a cat scampered across the yard, and he looked like he might be made out of graphite, like graphite lines that had learned to walk and move all on their own. I rubbed at my eyes as I rolled along, pretty sure I was just getting tired. I had been making sculptures and putting together today's pieces all week, and I was probably just starting to feel the strain. A little sleep was all I needed, and once I got home, I could start burning my candle at both ends again tomorrow. The sitter would sit in my truck till I woke up tomorrow morning, and I'd have added another piece or two by next Saturday. I didn't think much of it as I rolled along, until I saw the houses. The farther I drove, the harder it was to just ignore the strange changes in the landscape. I drove past a trailer park, and I could see all the gray lead outlines as the windows glowed. The insides looked like they were lit by bug zappers, that harsh fluorescent light making them seem to crackle. The spotlights made the concrete look porous, almost holy, and the dog resting out in front looked like if he were to bark, it would come out as a word bubble. It was all so very unreal, and I had to look down at my own hands in order to discover whether I too looked like a pencil sketch. I was pleased to find my normal level of realness, and just kept driving as I tried to get past whatever I had driven into. It didn't get bad until I came to the stoplight, though. There was only one stoplight before you got to the state line. It's probably there to allow people leaving the gas station or the liquor store to get back on the highway so they don't get creamed. The gas station had only a single light over the pump, but the inside looked welcoming. It reminded me of that painting, the one of the dead celebrities in the diner, and I was half tempted to turn in when something whooshed up to my left, and I turned to see a fire going on the side of the liquor store. It wasn't much more than a one-room building that sold beer and wine. I had driven past that pink stucco building 1,000 times, but it had an evil look to it tonight. It didn't glow like the trailers or the gas station did, and its face was dark and brooding as the glass reflected the fire on the side of it. At that moment, it seemed the antithesis of the gas station, and sitting across the street from each other, they almost seemed adversarial. The cars in the parking lot were the old rusty sort, pickups and dark-colored Cadillacs and long cigar-shaped constructions. They seemed to hunch around the lot like gargoyles, but as the fire began to build, I noticed the strange people that were feeding it. The store had a cage beside it, something the employees filled with cardboard boxes and trash and then burned when it got full. As I watched, the human-shaped creatures that seemed to be made of squiggly darkness were throwing boxes onto the fire and watching as they burned. The people weren't even approximations of people. They looked like a child's idea of human shapes, the bodies bulbous and the heads lumpy. Their arms were muscled, and their legs disproportionately squat. They looked like orcs in the Lord of the Rings books, and just looking at them made me a little uneasy. They were supposed to be humans, but I had never seen anything less human in my life. They looked like natives in an old jungle picture, dancing around a flaming idol, and as I watched, I saw one of them take notice of me. I glanced back at the light, but it was hard to tell what color it was. All three were shades of gray, and as they flipped through, I couldn't tell what I was supposed to do. Something moved in front of that grainy flame then, drawing my attention back to the liquor store. The four of them froze as they saw that I had noticed them, their red eyes glaring as they prepared to run at my truck. Red or green, I no longer cared. I put my foot on the gas and blew through the intersection, rolling up the road as the four lumpy homunculuses watched me go. My tires squealed as they flew up the blacktop. The trees and the buildings we passed had begun to pulsate a little, their lead edges crackling like lightning. The whole thing looked like a Tex Avery cartoon, something from a sketchbook nightmare skit from an old show, and the longer I watched the sky, the less I cared about the road. My eyes were glued to that fuzzy space, the graphite lining sending phosphorescent clarity through the steely gray sky. Something was rising up amongst the clouds, a silver orb of a moon that suddenly and unexpectedly filled me with fear. Then it rolled in the sky, and I was suddenly looking at the eye of some great beast. It swam in that inky space, this perfect orb, and when it found me, I began to shake. The eye looked straight at me, fixing me with its gaze, not blinking as it regarded me, and that regard bore into me. I found myself unable to look away. When the harsh lights and the equally harsh horn invaded my space, I continued to be aware of nothing but that huge blinking moon. Then, suddenly, everything went black, and I was left floating in the inky blackness until the beeping brought me back to the waking world. I was in a hospital, arm aching from the IV and head pounding from the wound that had likely landed me there. My sister had been playing on her phone, but she looked up when I started groaning back to consciousness. She stopped me from getting up, and I realized that I only saw her out of the corner of one eye. Thankfully, the other was just covered in bandages, but at the time, it was pretty jarring. My sister filled me in and said she was glad I had come out because no one understood what had happened. According to the man in the moving truck, the one I had scared half to death, I had crossed into his lane as he was driving from the depot. He had swerved, barely avoiding the truck, and he said when I left the road something had fallen out of the back, and he had thought my passenger might have slid out. I had proceeded into the nearby woods before the tree had stopped my progress. It wasn't until he went to check on my passenger that he realized it was nothing but a dented metal doll, and went to check on me. He had helped me out of the truck and stayed with me till the ambulance came, and that was how I had ended up spending the next 4 days in a coma. I don't know what happened, and I can't really explain it, but somehow I slipped into something very different. The road I'd come to know was not what I had driven that night. and I suddenly found myself in a place that I couldn't come to terms with. I tried to tell people that, but they seemed to believe that I might have been drugged, or maybe I had picked up something I couldn't handle at the flea market. They never found anything heavier than Xanax in my system, though. My sister had floated the idea that I fell asleep and had a dream before I drove off the road, but I know what I saw. I saw those things, and I'm lucky to have escaped. So if you're driving the highways of America, be on the lookout for pockets of strangeness, and good luck to you if you happen to slip into one of them. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. The road in question, the road between Dothan and Florida, is one that I'm actually very familiar with, and it's actually a spot that debuts a lot in my stories lately. If you've never driven along it, the place is quite a surreal look at things that are abandoned and things that are slowly going back to nature, and it's quite beautiful in its own way. If you ever get the chance to drive that road, I believe it's Highway 98, I definitely recommend that you do. If you enjoyed tonight's story, maybe go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky stories we do here. If you feel like you might be up for some more spooky stories, go ahead and click the video that will appear at the end of this one, and maybe leave me a comment. I like it when people comment. Let's go ahead and thank our patrons before we sign off. Thanks to the Irish Devil for being our spooky ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet for being our spooky skeleton tier contributor. Thanks to Emily Coltsfoot, Xaronan, and Leslie Lou Riddle for being our ghostly reader tier contributor. And thanks to Glenn Jenkins for being our ghostwriter tier contributor. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. Have you come on down to Patreon and had a look yet? There's a lot of great rewards there, especially and not limited to getting your spooky a day early or having your name read out here at the end of the show. Ghostly readers also get one of my new books anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. So, why not come have a look? You might find something that you like. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening. My brother and I work for a cleaning company in our hometown. We're both still in high school. He's a junior and I'm a senior, so it was either this or fast food. The owner is a friend of Dad's. We'll call him Chuck to protect the innocent. Chuck's a nice enough guy. My brother and I have known him since we were young, but he leaves a lot to be desired as a businessman. Don't misunderstand. The guy makes money, but he seems to think that employee safety comes after profit. My brother and I worked like dogs for him all summer, cleaning out people's yards and moving boxes out of abandoned houses. Anything to make a buck, I guess. It was nearly July when Chuck got a call from another of his old friends, Philip O'Dare. If Chuck is a little underhanded in his business practices, then Philip is a goddamn pirate. He's the town's #1 real estate agent, and I mean everything when I say that he sells everything. He owns a pawn shop, Broke Brokers, with his younger brother. When he wasn't out selling houses, he was looking for homes to buy. The homes he picks up are rough, most of the time. If he were selling them a fixer-upper, that would be okay. The problem is that after he picks up these houses for next to nothing, he does shoddy Band-Aid repairs on them. Then he sells them for top prices, usually to pick them back up a few years later when the occupants move out in disgust. My current situation is thanks in part to Philip's underhanded renovations and Chuck's less than stellar business sense. The Foskey place? I asked. I didn't even know Mr. Foskey was dead. Chuck looked up from his notepad, his gray hair making him look like a cloud with glasses. He's not. Foskey's son sent him to Golden View and sold his house to O'Dare Real Estate. That made me a little sad. Mr. Foskey had been my English teacher when I was in middle school, and he had also taught Dad when he was in 8th grade. My brother had not been what you would call an advanced English compatible student, so he didn't get him. But Dad and I both agreed that Mr. Foskey was the best. He always had such cool lesson plans and exciting books in his class library. He challenged his advanced students to be more than a title and wanted us to be more than just A-plus students. I was sad to hear that he had been fired a couple of years ago. He had started to get a little senile in his old age. Everyone said so. And his taste in books had always been a little esoteric. After he'd been fired, he'd become a hermit. He only came out at night, and the word around town was that he'd been going through people's garbage. What he sought was anyone's guess, but people came to visit him and said his house was full of junk. Now he was gone, off to the mental hospital in the next town, and we were left to clean up his house. Phil says to save anything that looks valuable. Apparently the guy had a ton of old books that were probably worth money. Foskey's son sold Phil the house and everything in it, so don't bother saving anything sentimental. A couple of weeks in the puzzle factory and the old man probably won't even remember his own name. I left before I could say anything stupid. The thought of a brilliant man like Mr. Foskey losing his mind in a place like Golden View made me sick at the time. Now, I think it might be exactly what he deserves. We arrived at 6 a.m. Philip was waiting for us, a cell phone against his ear and a latte in his other hand. He was dressed in his usual blue suit, and I imagine we looked pretty shabby next to him, in our jeans and black t-shirts with the company name on them. My brother had rolled the sleeves up on his motorcycle boots peeking out from beneath the cuffs of his new jeans. He was going through some kind of James Dean phase, but it really just made him look like an extra in Grease. We waited for Philip to finish, and when he did, he looked at us like we were in the way. "Well, what are you waiting for?" "A breakdown on what exactly we're doing," I said a little hotly. "I thought you boys were smart. Clean the damn house and save what can be sold. Old bastard bought the house 5 years ago after his kids moved out. It's a 1-bedroom, 1-bath, and I have a client who wants to see it Wednesday, so if you could not take all week about it, that would be great. We'll take a look and let you know by the end of the day, okay?" He scoffed again, clearly saving all that charm for his clients. "Just have it done. I'll pay you double if you can finish it by Wednesday. You, not your boss." That was a tempting offer. Chuck was great, but he tended to be a little tight with the checks. We were being paid under the table, so we couldn't really argue, but some extra cash would be sweet. I shook Philip's hand, and he said to have it done by Wednesday. He nodded and left, the sound of his T-Bird cutting up the road as he went. I immediately regretted my words when I saw inside the house. The house had a strange floor plan. There was a living room, a dining room with a bar that overlooked from the kitchen. Off the kitchen was a bathroom, and a door to get out back where you could sit in a small backyard. Off the living room was another door that I guessed was to the bedroom. The house had a strange sort of feel to it when you came inside, and I could believe that such a place would draw Mr. Foskey to it. It was eccentric in a practical way, a way that he would have understood. The living room dining room was full of trash and furniture, stuffed floor to ceiling, and I could see a little walkway from the living room to the kitchen. The kitchen was spared the worst of it, but it was still covered in garbage. The floor was a solid foot of garbage, the cabinets were covered in old food wrappers, and the refrigerator seemed clean, though it wouldn't open due to the junk on the floor. The cabinets were stuffed with garbage, and I sighed as I thought about the job at hand. This looked like a good week's worth of work between the living room and the kitchen alone. I'll take the kitchen, you take the living room. Whoever finishes first will help the other. "Why do you get the kitchen?" I rolled my eyes at him. "I see a lot of furniture in there, football star. You got Dad's build, so you do the heavy lifting." "Guess that means you got Mom's build, so I guess you can get your bitch ass in the kitchen," he said with a laugh. We put on our respirators, rubber boots, and thick gloves. We hadn't seen anything that would make us break out the hazmat suits yet, but I like to be safe. We were definitely working with some old refuse, possibly refuse that had been outside, which meant that rodents were a danger, as well as insects. We were cleaning out a shed like this not even a month ago, and ran upon a secret hornet's nest. That had made us wary about attacking big mounds of trash, so I was careful to look where I was putting my hands as I started in the kitchen. I got lucky. The trash was mostly dry and clean, and it was easily bagged up. I heard my brother straining and grunting in the living room, and I looked out to see him wrestling with a sizable piece of furniture. He was dragging it out onto the lawn. Philip had a mobile storage unit pointing out front, and then loading them into the unit. I watched him groan as he tried to lift an antique dining room table, which had been the linchpin on a large pile of garbage before going to help him. The pile fell over as we freed the table, and I helped him lug it out onto the yard. This is how we spent our first day, at least till mid-afternoon. By 4, I had all the garbage out of the kitchen. My brother had gotten most of the furniture out of the living room, and was wiping sweat off his brow as he stuffed papers into a bag. "Doesn't this guy have AC?" "I haven't seen a thermostat. Maybe it's in the bedroom." My brother stood up and walked to the door, coming off the living room. As he opened it, I heard him whistle and came to see what he had found. Inside the bedroom was a tunnel of solid junk. It snaked to the left, getting dim inside, and the tunnel looked as though someone had cut it out of solid junk. "You sure you want to go in there?" I asked. He just rolled his eyes and took a pen light out of his pocket. "This shouldn't take long," he said as he tromped into the room. I stood for a few seconds, making sure the whole pile wouldn't just fall over, and went back to work in the kitchen. I should have gone with him, maybe been a little more attentive, but I was in a hurry and really wanted to have a look at the bathroom before quitting time. I got all the garbage bags out of the cabinets, stuffed 6 bags with nothing but trash. I unearthed the sink and the microwave and had started cleaning the countertops when I noticed something wasn't right. The trash was still in the same place my brother had left it, and the door to the bedroom still hung open. Was he still in there? There was no way it had taken him an hour to navigate the bedroom and find the thermostat. I called his name into the bedroom. The name almost seemed to echo down the trash hall, but there was no answer. It was starting to get close to sunset, and I really wanted to be out of here before dark. Thinking maybe he had fallen or gotten hurt in there, I grabbed a headlamp and headed into the trash maze. I turned the corner and was bombarded by the claustrophobia of the trash tunnel. The tunnel was a solid mass of trash that seemed almost sculpted. It was like someone had built a wall out of mortar and trash and then cut a tunnel out of it. There was a soft light coming from the garbage wall, and when I turned off my headlamp, I found I could see. The dim light seemed to be coming from something inside the wall, but even with the headlamp on, I couldn't tell what it was. It made navigating the strange, winding maze a little easier, but the size started to unsettle me as I moved. The bedroom was supposedly 12 by 12, but this maze seemed to be winding on farther than the whole house. I'd been taking turns for several minutes when I came upon the first strange sight. Coming around a bend, I came face to face with a small library. A small grotto held 4 bookcases, stuffed with old-looking books. Many of them were covered in mold, and as I got close, I could see bugs moving across them. I backed away and kept walking, not sure how deep this rabbit hole went, but wanting to be out more and more with every step. I kept looking down periodically, seeing if I could see a print from my brother's big rubber boots in the dust. I was looking for any sign that he had passed this way, but I was coming up with nothing so far. Then I came upon the old man. I turned a corner and found myself in a 10 by 10 park with honest-to-God grass. There was a lamppost that spilled light over the old park bench, and an old man sat on it, feeding real pigeons. As I approached, he patted the bench as though he wanted me to sit. One look at the old man told me that I did not want to sit there. He was dressed in a long coat that looked patched and frayed, a fuzzy old cap obscuring his face. He patted the seat again as I approached, but I had already decided that I would not be stopping. The whole situation was a little creepy, and I intended to just walk on and continue on my way. When his hand shot out and grabbed me, I nearly jumped a foot. His hand was covered in thick green mold, and when he looked up, I could see the same mold growing on his face. He grinned his gap-toothed smile at me, and for a moment I thought it was Mr. Foskey. His grip was firm, but moist, and when I pulled away, his hand slipped off, and he sat there, grinning at me. Something clamped down on my ankle then, and I looked down to see that he was feeding rats. These were wharf rats, too, no cute pet shop mice, and as they tried to scuttle up my rubber boot, I kicked out at them and turned to run. The old man was standing then, a creaky moan coming from his dusty throat, but I was out of the park and into the tunnel again. I ran, flat out, and as I ran, I imagined I could see lights in the wall reaching out for me. Their brightness came reaching out towards me, and I ducked away from them as I came. The tunnel seemed to be nightmarishly claustrophobic as I ran, and I began taking turns at random. I had no idea where I was or where I was going. I only knew that I wanted to be out. I prayed that this tunnel would end, and I would just flop out onto the carpet in the dirty living room, that my brother would be waiting there for me. He would wonder where I had been and what had taken me so long, and we would leave and never come back to this place. Screw O'Dare, and screw his money too. As I stopped panting, clutching the stitch in my side, I just wanted to be out. That's when I heard the footsteps. They echoed strangely up the tunnel, and they filled me with a deep sense of dread. Was it the old man coming after me? Some new horror? I didn't know, but the steps were heavy and ominous, and I knew that I did not want them to find me. I hid around the corner in a little trash alcove and shuddered in my cowardice. The steps grew closer. I was shaking all over. The footsteps were slow and knowing. I just knew it was some kind of new monster that wanted me. It was some mold monster that was trying to invade me like it had invaded the old man. It was the old man who wanted to breathe spores into me and infect me. I didn't know what it was, and I didn't care. At that moment, I just wanted to leave, and I was willing to kill to get out of here. Clump, clump, clump. I saw a rock on the ground. Clump, clump, clump. It looked jagged, broken like a paving stone. Clump, clump, clump. I picked it up and held it against my chest. Clump, clump, clump. I closed my eyes and steeled myself for what I was about to do. Clump, 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 clump. I rounded the corner and swung the stone, and it connected with something that immediately staggered back, bellowing. I swung it again, but it hit me around the waist and drove me to the ground. I dropped the rock in the skirmish, and as it rolled away, I felt hands close around my throat. It was choking me, choking the life out of me, and as I groped around, I could see little black swirls at the corners of my vision. I swung my fist out at it, but without oxygen, it was a weak swing at best. I went back to groping, trying to find something, and finally, my hands settled on something hard and jagged. I grabbed the rock and swung it, filling my lungs with air as the hands loosened, and the shape fell away. I lifted the rock and swung it down at the shape, hitting it in the head. I straddled it, swinging it again and again and again, until it finally stopped moving. I was panting then, out of breath, covered in sweat, but I felt my breath escape in a sudden whoosh when I flipped on the headlamp. I was choking again. I could not find any air. I was straddling a human being, his face mostly caved in, but the rolled-up shirt sleeves were a dead giveaway. He was wearing our shirt, the shirt with the two happy moving men on the front, and as I threw the rock away, the tears began to flow. I jumped off him and ran, leaving him in the tunnel to God only knows what. I ran in a blind panic. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, and I just kept running. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs heaved. I bumped into the walls and saw them crumble around me. As they fell, I felt the trap envelop me. I embraced the entombing refuse as my fate. I had killed my brother. I deserved to be encased in garbage for all eternity. I deserved it. I deserved it. I could see flashing lights and was aware of being carried. I opened my eyes to see two paramedics rolling me into an ambulance. Chuck was following behind them, clearly panicked. Philip was there too, but he looked more aggravated than worried. As we drove away in the ambulance, I looked around. They seemed to become aware that I wasn't unconscious. What happened? I asked, and the two of them filled me in. Philip had come out after dark to check on our progress. After finding the house mostly still cluttered, he had called Chuck and told him to get down there. The house was still a disaster, and his workers were nowhere to be found. When Chuck arrived, they found me passed out in the living room under a pile of garbage. They had called the paramedics, fearing I had broken my neck, and had then come to check me out. "Para says you're lucky to be alive, honestly," said Chuck. Philip elbowed him, wanting him to shut up. "Why?" I asked. He said the whole place was crawling with black mold. It was around the crown of the ceiling, the baseboards. Hell, the whole place was ate up. It's a good thing your brother left early, eh? I told Chuck I didn't remember him leaving. I told him about the bedroom, the tunnel, the strange things I'd seen there. I don't think Chuck believed me, but they did go back to the house to look for him. They came to see me in the hospital later that night, told me they hadn't seen a hide nor hair of him. He wasn't at home. They had called Dad, and his truck was still at Chuck's place. They didn't know where he was, but they were sure he would turn up. I didn't answer that. A week later, they let me go, and I went back to the house. It's still a mess. The guys Philip got to clean it aren't as diligent as my brother and I, but they're great at leaving doors unlocked. I stood before the bedroom door like I expected it to open on its own and suck me in. It didn't, and when I finally opened it, I found not a tunnel, but a cluttered bedroom on the other side. Just a bedroom. No tunnel, no monsters, just a regular old bedroom. It's been 2 weeks, and no one's seen my brother. He's lying dead in some weird trash tunnel with his head caved in. A part of me knows this, but a part of me also knows that there is no trash tunnel behind that door. I don't know what to do. Dad is getting worried. The police have no leads, and I can't find the tunnel. I killed him. It's my fault. But if I tell people the story, they're going to lock me up in Goldenview right along with Mr. Foskey. I went to visit him a few days ago. No one's monitoring who visits the residence at Goldenview. When I asked him about the trash tunnel and the glowing mold, he just stared at me blankly. I begged him to tell me, screamed at him to help me find my brother, but whatever light was in Mr. Foskey when I was in his English class is gone now. Now he just sits in the day room and watches soap operas with the rest of them. I don't know what to do. How do I get my brother back? What will happen to whatever poor sap buys the house next when they open that door? Will they find their familiar bedroom? Or will they be the next victim of the glowing tunnel? Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. Looks like it's time to thank our patrons again. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle for being our Spooky Skeleton Tier contributor. Thanks, Leslie. We just couldn't do it without you. If you'd like to have your name read at the end of every episode and every TikTok I make, come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you too can be part of our Spooky Skeleton Tier army. And of course, thanks for joining us. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.
"Oh my God, there it is! Stop the car, Jacob!" Lily exclaimed as the house she saw in the ad came into view. Lily and Jacob had been in the same neighborhood for most of their 12-year marriage. They had liked the area when they moved in, but the peaceful neighborhood had seen its share of crime and decline lately. The straw that broke the camel's back and made them decide to move had been 3 nights ago when they'd been out to dinner. They'd been celebrating their 12-year anniversary when someone broke into their house and ransacked the place. Anything of value that wasn't locked in the safe was taken. When the police finally got there, they acted as though they couldn't care less. There was absolutely no help. So the next day, Lily went online to find a new house within their price range. Lo and behold, she found a lovely house a few neighborhoods over, on the nicer side of town. It was a closer commute to Jacob's work and was well within their price range. Lily wasted no time calling the number on the ad and setting up a walkthrough. They had set it up for that Saturday morning, but when Saturday arrived, Lily had gotten a short text telling her to go ahead and have a look at the place and sending her the code to the key box on the door. The owners said that they wouldn't be able to make it, but if they wanted to take a look, they could go right ahead, just to be sure to return the key when they were done and let them know what they thought. Jacob was very reluctant and wanted Lily to reschedule for a time when the owner could join them, but Lily wouldn't hear of it. She threatened to go herself, but that seemed to make up Jacob's mind, and he agreed to come with her. As they pulled into the driveway, Lily could hardly contain herself. She jumped out of the car and rushed to the porch, stretching her arms and taking a deep breath. The scent of gardenias filled her nose, the smell reminding her of summers she spent at her grandmother's house as a child. In fact, the front porch reminded her a little of her grandparents' house, too. The long porch stretched the whole front of the house, and it had several weather-worn rockers and a swing hanging from a pair of chains. Had her grandmother had a swing like that? Had Lily sat on it and swung when she was a little girl? Had she gone too high, perhaps? And Jacob leaned out the window, his hand over the phone. "Sweetheart, it's work. I gotta take this. I'll catch up with you as soon as I get done." Lily gave him a tart look and shrugged. She took one more deep breath before mounting the porch and approaching the front door. She had seen it on Zillow when she was looking for houses, and it had been one of the biggest reasons she wanted the place. It had 8 squares on the front. There was red, green, and green again, just like her grandparents' door. She could remember standing in front of the door as a little girl, feeling excited as she waited for it to open. Since her grandmother wasn't going to come to let her in this time, she put in the code and got the key to open the door. The door opened with a little creak, and Lily stepped inside with a broad grin. Jacob looked up at Lily as she walked into the house, thinking of how beautiful she looked as she walked past the threshold. He couldn't have known this, but it would be the last time he'd ever see her. As Lily stepped into the front hall of the house, she felt a bit of deja vu. She felt like she was coming home, as if she'd been here 1,000 times before. On her right was a large archway that led into a sitting room. Lily decided to check out that room first, since it was the closest, and there was a window so she could look out and see if Jacob was coming in. As she walked into the room, she felt a strange change in the atmosphere, the whole thing beginning to shift. Lily walked to the window to call out to Jacob, but when she looked outside, his car was no longer in the driveway. Instead, there were several familiar-looking vehicles. Was that her parents' car from when she was 9? And that car looked like Aunt Judy's car. That truck parked on the street looked just like her grandparents'. But that was impossible. She'd watched her mom sell that car when she was 10. What was going on here? As she stood there confused, she heard a voice calling to her. Lily turned around, but she was no longer alone. Her family filled the couch and chairs. The room looked just like her grandma's sitting room from when she was a kid. She could remember seeing everyone seated like this once before, and the memory made her feel kind of crawly. As a child, they had often sat in her grandmother's sitting room during holidays or special occasions, but something was off today. Something wasn't quite how she remembered it. Everyone looked as though they had been crying. She didn't remember this scene from her childhood quite like this. Something was very wrong. As she abandoned her place next to the window, she walked as though in a haze to where her mother sat. She looked up as Lily approached and patted the couch next to her, motioning for her to sit. Her mother put an arm around her, not an altogether familiar feeling, and when Lily spoke, her voice was that of a very young child. "What's wrong, Mama?" Lily asked, looking around at everyone and seeing tears welling up in their eyes. Her father spoke first, though. "Lilybug, there's been an accident. Your grandmother fell down the basement stairs. She didn't make it." As those words left his mouth, everyone began to wail, and Lily felt her mother press her face against her head. Lily, however, sat speechless, trying to process what she'd heard. This wasn't how she remembered this, was it? Lily got up from her spot on the couch and began to pace. Her memory of that day was fuzzy, but as she walked between the couch and the window, it began to solidify. She remembered her family telling her that her grandma had gone to live in Boca, not that she was dead. When Lily turned back to confront her mother, though, she found that she was alone in the sitting room again. The furniture, her family, everything was gone. The room was as it was when she walked through the front door, and Lily shuddered as a palpable chill ran through her. "Looks like a goose walked over your grave," she heard her grandmother say, and it was as if she were just in the next room. Lily rushed to the front door to get out of the house, wanting nothing so much as to smell the gardenias again, before she jumped into the car and told Jacob to drive away. She should have listened to him. She should have waited, but she'd been so eager to see this place. It had brought back so many memories, so many times that made her feel young again. But that was gone now. She didn't care how dangerous their neighborhood was. She would gladly live there for the rest of time if it meant that she could leave this mausoleum. The door, however, was gone. The entryway was still there, but the wall where the front door should be was a blank. She ran back to the sitting room window and started pounding on it, trying to get Jacob's attention. His car was back, and he was sitting in the front seat, but he didn't seem to hear her. "Jacob, please, help me!" she screamed, but Jacob didn't answer. He glanced up, but then looked back down to the phone, talking with Terry or Mark or whoever it was calling him from work. He couldn't see her. He didn't know she was stuck. And suddenly Lily realized she was alone. If she was going to get out of here, she'd have to do it herself. Lily thought she might as well look for another way out, and as if summoned, she noticed the hallway that ran opposite the sitting room. There would be a bathroom down there, if she remembered right, and some cold water on her face sounded exactly like what she needed. She headed to the bathroom, but as she got closer, she felt that strange shivering again. As she came closer, she could hear the sound of sloshing water, as if someone was splashing frantically in the bathtub. Lily stepped cautiously to the door that separated the hall from the small bathroom, and peeked in as the wooden barrier made a funny squeaking sound. She could see her father, knelt down at the side of the tub, and she could see him holding her mother's head under the water. Lily stepped back, the door opening to give her a terrible view of her mother's drowning. But it all seemed wrong. That wasn't how she remembered that horrible time when she was 12. Was it? Lily remembered her father trying to help her mother out of the tub when she'd had a seizure. She remembered him trying, but not being able to save her. This new reality of what really happened hurt her brain more than her heart, and Lily tore off in a mad scramble to be away from the awful sound of her mother drowning again and again. Lily ran to the staircase that lay beyond the foyer and darted up the steps without thinking of where she was going. As she ran into one of the bedrooms, her mind still reeling from the scene below, the feeling of déjà vu came yet again. As she turned to take in the room that she had just run into, she could see a crib with a mobile twirling overhead. The smiling yellow ducks spun drunkenly, but even their placidity couldn't bring joy to the scene. This was her son's room. No, she pleaded, not this memory. Her husband walked into the room, holding their 3-week-old son to his chest. It should have brought her joy to see him again, till she realized her wonderful husband was holding little Jonathan's face to his chest, muffling the sound of his cries. He didn't seem to notice her watching him, didn't seem to care at all that he was snuffing the life from what would be their only child. After the baby had stopped crying, Jacob quietly kissed him on his little cheek and placed him in his crib. But no, that's not how it had gone at all. Lily's memory was fuzzy, but she remembered Jacob holding their baby and comforting him till he fell asleep. When she had woken up and noticed that Jonathan hadn't woken up for his feeding yet, she went to his room and found him cold and blue in his crib. She screamed for her husband, and Jacob had rushed to her side to find her cradling their poor baby as if she could bring him back to life. They called 911, but when the EMTs arrived, they said it was too late. His death was stated as SIDS, and the two had been left to mourn their loss. Lily didn't know how much more she could take in this house. She slid down the wall, crying as the crib vanished, and the room once again was empty. Lily sat there for a few minutes, getting her bearings. Then she got up and slowly walked down the stairs. She didn't want to see any more, but she knew that she had to get out of this house if she intended to have any sanity left when she escaped. As Jacob sat in the front seat, talking to his boss, he realized that Lily hadn't come out of the house yet. It had been at least an hour since he'd told her he'd catch up with her, and she should have been able to see the whole place twice in an hour. He looked up at the window that overlooked the front yard, hoping to see her looking out at him, but no such luck. "Listen, Mark, we can handle the rest of this on Monday. I need to check on Lily. She's alone in the house we're both supposed to be looking at, and I'm getting a little worried about her." "Okay, that's fine. See you Monday. Bye." As Jacob climbed out of the car and walked towards the porch, he could smell a familiar smell. He stopped in the walkway and took a deep whiff, savoring the scent he hadn't smelled in years. It was bourbon and cigar smoke, and it reminded him of the Saturday night poker games at his dad's house. Dad's poker games had been full of both, and Jacob remembered peeking in as a kid so he could watch the festivities. As he got to the door and tried to open it to join his wife, the door was locked. He knocked, wondering why she had locked it behind herself if she wanted him to come take a look. "Lily, let me in, sweetheart. I'm sorry it took so long, but you know how much of a windbag Mark can be." But Lily didn't respond. He knocked a little louder, but still no response. At this point, Jacob began to worry that something had happened to her. He pounded on the door, his fears coming back at the thought of what could be happening to his wife. Hadn't he thought this sounded like a great way to get robbed or kidnapped? He didn't know this guy from Adam, and he had just let his wife go in alone. What had he been thinking? "Lily!" he yelled as he beat on the door. But no answer came. Lily walked down the steps and into the basement as if in a trance. She was numb from the torture that this house had put her through, and just wanted to be outside in the sun again before it could show her anything else. As she descended the basement stairs, the air shifted again, and she steadied herself for what was next. She opened her eyes to see that she was in her own basement, but something was off. The shelves where she kept the Christmas ornaments were pushed away from the wall. As she walked over to see why it was pulled away, she saw a trap door under where the shelf usually was. The door was open, and Lily could hear something down there. Whatever it was crying out softly, as though too weak to scream. Jacob, worried and a little angry, decided to try to find another way in. He walked around to the back of the house, but as he came to the gate, he too felt that overpowering sense of déjà vu. When he got to the backyard, he saw a swing set that looked lonely in the open space. It looked like his own swing set from when he was a kid, and he walked curiously towards it. When he reached the swing, Jacob sat down and looked at the back door. He realized it was his childhood door, and scrunched up his eyes as he tried to make sense of it. He'd spent a lot of time on his swing while his dad talked with his mom. As he watched the window by the door, Jacob saw people inside talking loudly, their silhouettes performing sad little plays for this child's eyes to watch. But this isn't how he remembered this happening. It had been just another fight, his dad starting it like always. The mailman had been sitting at their kitchen table when he came home, a cold towel on his head, as he drank a glass of his mom's lemonade. He had nearly collapsed on the front lawn in the heat, and though his father had smiled when he saw the man cooling off in his kitchen, Jacob had seen his mother flinch when he looked at her. His father had waited till after dinner to tell his son to go play out back while they talked, and his mother had seemed to beg him with her eyes not to leave. Jacob watched as his dad reached for something on the counter, and his mom's silhouette backed away slowly. His dad lunged with a sudden rage, and Jacob imagined he could hear the frying pan connect with the side of her head. His dad's dark afterimage stood over her for a few minutes, the pan coming down a few more times until sanity seemed to reassert itself. He stood up, the image realizing that it had talked a little too vigorously this time. Jacob could almost see the lack of confidence in the outline as it weighed its options. When it looked out at him, Jacob realized his father meant to make him an accomplice to his folly. "Jacob," his father yelled from the doorway, "get me a shovel from the shed. Then I need you to get in the truck and wait for me." Jacob hopped dutifully off the swing, with much smaller feet than his own. He was horrified at his blind fanaticism, but understood it all too well. As he ran to the shed to fetch the shovel, he realized that the memory of the night his mother left him wasn't the way he remembered it. Dad wasn't planning a garden to surprise her with, and Mom hadn't left them for a fella who ran the register at Ralph's. He did what he was told, though, and grabbed the shovel. He gave it to his dad and ran to the truck as his father began grunting at something that must have been very heavy in the kitchen. It couldn't have been his mother. Jacob's mom ate like a bird. Surely he wouldn't have strained so much to lift her. As soon as Jacob got in the truck, everything became hazy again. He realized he was back in his own car, his father's truck gone. As Jacob sat there, he began to cry. He didn't want to cry. He hadn't cried in so long, but found the tears just wouldn't stop. He was terrified of what had just happened. He was scared of a man he had buried 10 years ago. He was grieving for his mother in a way that he had never managed to when he was 8. Above all else, Jacob was worried about his wife. "Hello?" Lily whispered as she descended the stairs. "Who's down there? Do you need help?" She whispered, understanding the irony of her question a little too late. As she spoke, the whimpering stopped. It was dark and damp down here, the floor made of packed earth, and the smell of dirt and iron filled her nose. As she felt around for a light switch, She could hear something shifting across the room. Lily paused for a second, trying to listen to what it was. It was hard to hear over the sound of her heart beating in her ears, and Lily was afraid of getting snuck up on down here by the specters in the house again. She found a small chain hanging from a bulb in the ceiling. As she pulled it, the small light lit the room pathetically, but what she saw still terrified her. This was not any memory that she had ever had. She looked to where the sound was coming from and found herself staring back at her from a dirty mattress on the floor. She was battered and beaten, starved, with one hand attached to the wall by a metal cuff. Lily, in shock, started to back away, but heard someone walking into the basement. She quickly turned off the light and backed up against the wall, praying the darkness would hide her. As the steps got closer, Lily felt around for something to defend herself with, in case the person came downstairs. As she slid her hand across the cold dirt floor, she found what felt like a pipe, and picked it up as quickly as possible, holding it to her chest. A few moments later, she could hear heavy footsteps coming down the cellar stairs. She closed her eyes and prayed she wouldn't be seen. When she opened her eyes again, she was no longer in the cellar. She was standing in front of the front door. Jacob got himself together and returned to the backyard to find a way in. The swing set was gone, as was the shed. The back door was no longer his childhood back door either. This door was white, with a blue ruffle at the top of the window, and the realization made him feel a little bit better. He pushed up the 3 steps to the door and turned the knob. The door opened easily, and as he walked over the threshold into the kitchen, he felt the shift again. He was in his dad's kitchen, and his father was talking to the police officer. "Mr. Daniels, do you know of anywhere your ex-wife would have gone?" the officer asked, tapping his pencil on an ancient-looking notebook. "No, officer. Like I've told you before, she called me 3 weeks ago asking to pick up our son because she needed a break from him. He can be a handful, so I agreed and went over to get my boy. She didn't tell me where she was going or when she'd come back. Jacob, go on to your room now and play. Let me and these officers finish our conversation." He had been 9 when the officers came to question his father. Jacob knew better than to disagree with the old man, but he knew that his mother had made no such request. At the time, it had seemed that maybe Daddy had been confused, but Jacob found out later that his mother had divorced him and left town with someone else. She had never tried to see Jacob again, and his father telling the police a lie had always seemed a little weird to him. One look at his father's flinty eyes, however, had told him to do as he was told, and Jacob ran for the staircase in the living room. He was walking towards the doorway when he looked back towards his father, only to find that everything was gone. The kitchen was empty now, save for him. Lily reached for the handle of the door, turning the knob with trepidation. Was this another trick? Some new game for the house to tease her with? She had never given up hope that she would get out, but she thought she might have believed the house would keep her here forever anyway. Would they even find her body, she wondered? Would they know it was her if they did? The door swung open, and Lily was again assaulted by the smell of gardenias. She came down the steps, running over the walk, and found the car exactly where she'd left it. She almost saw Jacob sitting there, the phone still pressed against his ear, but when she stuck her head into the window, she found the car was empty, the keys still hanging in the ignition. Lily wasn't sure what to make of this, and as she sat in the passenger seat, her mind started trying to make sense of what she'd seen. She realized her marriage, her whole life, was full of these little lies. Her mind made up memories to protect her from reality, but the house showed her the truth. She remembered what her father had done to her mother and what her husband did to their son, and she felt disgust well up inside her. "How could I be so stupid?" she whispered, tears coming unbidden. That still didn't explain why she had seen herself down in that cellar in such a state. As Lily thought about it, she realized she needed answers. She climbed over the driver's side and turned the key. The engine came to life, and Lily peeled the tires as she headed home. She wouldn't feel safe in that house until she checked the basement to be sure of what was there. Jacob would be angry if he came back to find the car missing, and if such a place existed in her home, she would likely find herself in there if he made it home. Jacob called out to Lily, hoping to find her safe and sound as he made it to the stairs. He could hear someone upstairs, and he kept calling for his wife as he ascended. He could hear someone crying in the bedroom to the right of him, and he was afraid that she had gotten hurt, or worse, that someone had hurt her. "Sweetheart, is that you? Are you okay?" he called out. He slowly opened the door and peeked in to see himself holding their son. His wife cried as she watched him smothering their son. The baby had been crying for hours, and Jacob couldn't handle that high-pitched squeal anymore. He snapped, and it was something he regretted every day. He had tried to move from beneath the shadow of his father, especially after what he'd done to Lily, but it seemed that you never quite forgot the old ways or the old lessons. He reached for Lily as she lay there crying, but as his hands passed through her, she turned to dust beneath his fingers. Everything melted away like dandelion fluff, and suddenly the room was empty. As he backed out of the room, he heard sobbing from the bedroom across the hall again. Jacob's hands shook as he reached for the knob, but he had to find Lily and make her understand how sorry he was for their son's death. He peeked inside as the door creaked open and could see his own bedroom. Lily was crying as she spoke to someone on the phone. She was talking about, she was talking about his little secret. She had found the root cellar, the shame he had hidden for years, and now she knew everything. He charged in, trying to stop her, but as soon as he crossed the threshold, it all just melted away. Jacob's father had often said that the apple didn't fall far from the tree, and Jacob supposed he'd been right. Lily had taken a lot of convincing, a lot of mental conditioning, but Stockholm Syndrome was an interesting thing. She never remembered how she came to be in Jacob's basement after he took her from her work one evening. She never questioned how they'd been married for 12 years when he had only snatched her 7 years ago. She had accepted that there were no pictures of their wedding because of the fire that had burned their apartment. She had accepted that their son had died of SIDS too, though he thought maybe that one had been harder to swallow than the rest. In many ways, it was like her mind created answers for questions before they were asked. By the sound of it, she had been doing that for most of her childhood. Jacob's childhood had been fraught, but Lily's had been something from a pulp novel. She'd been happy to forget, happy to cloud her own mind with misty memories and rose-colored tint. But this damn house had probably shown her all sorts of things that pulled the wool from her eyes. As Jacob sat in the empty room, he wondered if prison would be worse than living in this warped memory for the rest of his life. The whispers from the house told him that he'd never get to know. There would be no open door waiting for someone like Jacob. The house had a new toy, a new rat in its cage, and Jacob would never bask in the sun again. My grandpa was an odd guy. He was clearly wealthy, but no one was ever sure how. He lived frugally in a small house on a quarter of an acre, with a sensible car and nothing too fancy in the house. If you'd driven past it, you would have assumed that some old-timer on a pension was just moldering away his golden years there. And you'd have been right, in some ways. Where he showed his wealth was in his generosity. Grandpa liked to give. He gave the best Christmas presents. He had the best candy for Halloween, donated to charities, and liked to see people happy. If you asked him how he could afford to be so generous, however, he would always just wink and say he had his ways. Not even my grandmother knew where his money came from, and they were married for 50 years. So when he died, we all wondered who would inherit his mysterious fortune. My cousins had loved Grandpa. Grandkids always do, but the two of us had always been close. My old man hadn't even waited till I was born to go grab some milk and cigarettes, and Grandma and Grandpa had helped my mom raise me so she could go to work. I have a lot of fond memories of sitting with Grandpa and watching TV, taking walks around the neighborhood, and eating ice cream at this little shop on the corner. He would always tell me to appreciate the little things because the smallest things could be the ones that changed your life forever. "Take this," he would say, showing me the door knocker that he often carried in his pocket. "I found this when I was young, sifting through trash in a landfill as I looked for bottles to sell. It became my lucky charm, and it changed my life forever." Grandpa carried that door knocker for as long as I had known him, and it was pretty unique. It was a brass hand holding an apple, and it was all meticulously crafted in exhausting detail. The fingers had individual nails, the apple had a stem and leaves, and even the knuckles had wrinkles on them that had been carefully worked. I couldn't believe as a young child that Grandpa had just pulled this out of a dump, but he carried it everywhere, and I suppose it did bring him luck. The funeral was beautiful, everyone there having nothing but kind words for Grandpa and his family. After the service, my 3 cousins and I were asked to come to a will reading at the lawyer's office, and Grandpa had been as generous in death as he was in life. My cousins had received a trust fund for each of them, the amount payable on their 30th birthday, with a small living expense each month. Grandpa hadn't left a trust for me, but he had left me his little house, which I was pretty glad for. Mom had recently married, and though I liked Mike a lot, it had seemed a little odd to have her adult son living in the house that she was trying to make a new life in. Grandpa's old house was the perfect size for me, a college student with no real prospects of marriage in the near future. It was close enough to campus that I thought it would be ideal, but the lawyer had one more thing to give me. "Your grandfather was also very clear that I give you this," he said, and he handed me Grandpa's lucky charm, the brass door knocker. I thanked him, thinking I might hang it somewhere in the house in Grandpa's memory. It seemed only fitting to make a little memorial wall out of it. After all, Grandpa had loved the thing, and it had been his only constant possession for years. So I moved in that day, taking my things and wishing my mom and stepdad goodbye as I too embarked on a new life. Over the next few days, I changed the house around a little. I hung my flat screen on the wall, I moved Grandpa's favorite armchair around, I added my books to his bookshelf, and I donated his clothes and some of his other things to one of his favorite charities. I think Grandpa would have liked the thought that his stuff would help people in need, and they were very thankful. A few of them offered condolences, having read about his death in the paper. Grandpa bought a lot of his stuff from Goodwill and Habitat for Humanity, but he also donated a lot, so he was well known to them. It was Friday, about 4 days after the funeral, when I noticed the knocker on the counter and remembered my plan to hang it and make a memorial wall. I didn't have anything else planned for that day, so it seemed like a fine pursuit. I hung the knocker in the living room, putting it above the little shelf where I put some candles and a picture of Granddad. I put his wallet up there too, something else he was never without, and I added a tin of Altoids, a pocket watch I'd seen him wear, and a few other pictures of him. The door knocker was the centerpiece, and it all looked very nice when I was done. As I finished, I stepped back and admired it, thinking that Grandpa would have liked it too. That night was the first time I heard the knocking. I was lying in bed, doing some doom scrolling before I went to sleep, when suddenly I heard a loud thump from the living room. I took out my earbuds and listened, wondering if something had fallen over or maybe someone was at the door. But I didn't hear anything. I shrugged, thinking it had been my imagination, but just before I could slip the earbud back in, I heard it again. 3 long booms from the living room, then silence. I got up, wondering who could be knocking at my door at this time of night. and went to the front door and looked out the peephole. I opened the door to see if someone was joking around, but there was no one there. Front porch was empty. Grandpa didn't have any bushes or anything to hide behind. The kid, or whoever, would have had to have been the freaking Flash to make it off the porch without being seen, and I closed the door and started to go back to bed. I'd come to the hallway that led there when I heard it again. 3 long booms, then silence. I turned back, looking at the door, but there was nothing. The knocking hadn't come from the door. I would have been able to tell. No, it had come from the living room. I glanced around, looking for someone at the window, or maybe the rattle of a woodpecker on the eaves, but there was nothing. I decided to go back to bed and try to make sense of it later, but that wasn't the last time I heard it. I heard the knocking a couple of times over the weekend, but I could never quite nail down where it was coming from. It was always either 1, 2, or 3 knocks, followed by a 10-second pause, and then the same number of knocks before it stopped. By Monday, I was pulling my hair out, wondering if this was the pipes or something in the walls. Then I finally caught it. I'd found a wedding picture of my grandparents sitting in a desk, something Grandpa had probably put away so he wouldn't miss Grandma too much, and I decided it would look very nice on the shelf with the other memories. I was adding the wedding picture beside one of Grandpa accepting an award for philanthropy when the knocking on the wall suddenly rattled and thumped. I jumped back, not sure what to make of it, but it thumped once, twice, 3 times, and was quiet for about 10 seconds. I had just thought it might be a fluke or something. Then it did it again. Thump, thump, thump. Then silence. I took it off the wall and looked for some kind of motor or something, but it's just a normal brass knocker. It happened 2 more times that day, and I was extremely curious as to what made it do it and why. I started going through Grandpa's desk, hoping for some explanation, and that's when I found the letter. It was in the middle of a ledger book, addressed to me, and it wasn't even sealed, which was unlike Grandpa. It was just a single page of notebook paper, and I was glad to see Grandpa's cramped handwriting speaking to me from the page. I hope you're enjoying the house, and I hope you found this letter in a timely manner. I'd considered leaving it to Wilson to give to you, but I thought it might be better if you came across it naturally. Also, I wanted you to receive the knocker, and Wilson may have decided to keep it if he read the letter. He's a good man, an honest man, but greed can do funny things to people. You've probably noticed by now that the door knocker taps on its own sometimes. You wouldn't believe how I discovered its power, a complete accident, but I swear that what I'm about to tell you is absolutely true. The door knocker opens to different places. Place it on a door and wait for the knocks. Once it knocks, open the door and travel to where it takes you. The knocker only has 3 destinations, but they have been of great benefit to me and our family. When it knocks, you'll have 10 seconds to open the door. The second set of knocks is the door closing, so it won't work if you catch it on the second set. 1 knock opens onto the treasury, a room of treasures. Coins, gems, gold, all piled to the ceiling. If anything guards it, it has never bothered me, but I'm always careful not to take too much. 2 knocks opens onto the library, a room stuffed with bookshelves. You can spend hours, days even in this place, and time won't pass outside the door. I've learned so many things here, things lost to time, and read about things that have yet to happen. 3 knocks opens onto a void, a darkness that I dare not enter. Anything you put in here will be gone. Anything. There's no ground outside it, though, so don't walk in. I'm ashamed to say that it's where I've been putting my trash, but it's also where I hid your dog, the one I said that ran away when you were young. He died suddenly, just lay over and died, and I put him in there before you woke up from your nap. I'm sorry I never told you, but you were so young when it happened that I didn't think you would mourn him for long. The knocks were never consistent, but each knock seems to come at least once a day. The 3 knocks usually come in the evening or the early afternoon. 1 knock is usually in the morning or before noon, and the 2 knocks come when it will. While you're inside, don't let the door close. I was stuck in the library for a long time once, and was fortunate that your uncle came along and opened the door. Time doesn't affect people the same way inside the door as it does out here, so spend as much time as you want there. If you get hurt, however, you'll be injured, so be careful. You and I have always been close, and I know that you and your cousins have speculated for years about my mysterious fortune. The knocker is yours to do with what you will, but always remember that money breeds difficulty, which is why I have always kept it a secret. Good luck. I love you, kiddo. I read through the note a few times, trying to make sense of it. There was no way. Grandpa had always been sharp, no real problems mentally, but this sounded like the ramblings of a madman or a lunatic. The knocker, however, had moved on its own, that much was true. It occurred to me that there was a way to test the rest of it, so I decided to do just that. I took the knocker off the wall where I had hung it and attached it to the closet door in the living room. It looked a little silly there, a door knocker on a door that opened onto a closet with 2 coats and a bunch of board games in it, but I wanted to be sure. It was silly, the kind of thing you read about in fairy tales, but I wanted to be sure. I had a while to wait, but it finally happened, just as I was thinking about going to bed. It was around 10:30, and I reached for the remote to turn the TV off when I heard it. 2 loud knocks, seconds apart, on the closet door. I popped up, remembering I had 10 seconds to get there, and threw the door open. I expected to find the same closet that had been there earlier. I expected this to be a joke from my grandfather. But I didn't expect to find the great library that he had talked about on the other side. It was huge, a library to rival any I'd ever seen, and the windows shone with perfect sunlight as I stood in shock. The shelves were tall, taller than the roof of the house I stood in, and they had long trestled ladders with wheels to slide along the floor. I could see a grand staircase, and I felt sure that there would be levels above the next as well. I could learn anything in there. I could learn everything in there. But I remembered what Grandpa had said about not getting closed inside, and I looked for something to prop the door open with. I saw an end table and pulled it over to put in the way, stepping inside and marveling at the space. I spent hours perusing books. There were books on languages, on history, on science, on anything I would want to know. I only explored the first floor that night, but there was enough there to keep me reading for days, maybe months. I was studying architecture at college, and there was a whole section of books I could use to study any period, any style, and anything else I wanted. This place was like the libraries they talked about in Alexandria, the libraries in the Harry Potter books, and some kind of wizard's private collection from a fantasy novel, all rolled into one. Time may have moved differently here, but it didn't stop me from getting tired. I'd been excited when I came in, but after a couple of hours, I was yawning and rubbing my eyes. I decided to come back another time and let the door close as I pushed the end table out of the way. It was true. I couldn't believe it, but I had seen it myself. Grandpa had a magic door knocker. I spent the next few days testing each knock pattern, and Grandpa's observations had been spot on. I found the room with the gold in it the next day, and it was almost more impressive than the library. Think of a room full of any kind of money you could want. Gold bars, U.S. currency, ancient denarii, little stones with things scratched on them, gems, pearls, silver nuggets, and other things I didn't even have a name for. I reached for a stack of hundreds with a shaky hand and brought them out before I let the door close again. I had made about $2,000 in a matter of seconds, and I put it somewhere safe before heading to class. The void was a little scarier when I got to it, but I'd been setting garbage bags beside the door just in case, and I was home when the knocks finally came. The void was just what it claimed to be. It was like looking out at a night sky, except there was no stars. It was an inky, unnatural blackness, and I wondered if maybe Nietzsche had been describing this place when he talked about staring into the abyss. The space was utterly devoid of anything, but it seemed to crouch as well, just waiting for me to drop my guard. The bags went in, falling into a soundless, airless void before I closed the door again. It was great for a while, truly a blessing. I had all the money I needed, and whatever I took seemed to come back after I shut the door. I could take books from the library if I needed to, and anything I left on the work tables would put itself away on the shelf. I spent a lot of time in the library when I got there, and sometimes I would wake up to find that I'd fallen asleep. The door never slammed shut and trapped me in there, and without anyone to come behind me and accidentally close it, I felt safe in there. I learned so much in a relatively short time, and my professors were impressed with my knowledge. I considered bringing them the books I'd used to gain that knowledge, but I thought better of it. How would I explain it to them? A guy in his early 20s who just happened to have a book that was probably hundreds of years old. It was something that would probably gain the attention of the wrong sort of people. I was careful not to use too much of the money, not to spread it around too much, and careful not to show anyone the books I got from the library. It went well for about 4 months, but then I started getting knocks of another sort from the door. It started subtly, with little knocks and taps from time to time. I'm sure I missed a lot of them, but I would sometimes look up as I was watching TV or reading, expecting to see the knocker tapping, but finding it silent. I started watching the door closer, getting strange lights wafting beneath it sometimes. They would skitter across the bottom like strange shadows, and I found myself watching them more than the TV after a while. My trips to the other places were still uneventful, the landscapes the same as they had always been, but it was the time in between the knocks that I came to dread. Then one night, something knocked back. I was brushing my teeth when I heard a familiar boom sound 3 times. I checked the clock and saw it was nearly 11. A little late for knocking, but I stuck my head out to look at the door nonetheless. The toothbrush was still in my mouth, and I had expected to see nothing stranger than the knocker fall back into place. Instead, something knocked again, and it wasn't the knocker. I came slowly out of the bathroom, watching as strange lights came flashing from beneath the cracks of the door. It was like a haunted house attraction, and I almost expected to see smoke billowing out from underneath it. The knocks were shy, almost uncertain, and I was preparing to head to my room when something hit the door hard enough to shake it in the frame. I jumped back, not sure what to make of it, and when it hit again, I fell onto my butt and just watched it shake. Whatever was knocking was adamant about getting in, and it slammed its weight into the door again and again. The knob rattled and shook. The lights flashed faster and angrier. My teeth were chattering. This had never happened before, and I was terrified that whatever it was might get through. It slammed into it again, the old wood cracking in the frame. And when it struck this time, I saw something break through the surface and come grabbing blindly from within. It was an arm, a long purple arm, covered in scales. It thrashed around trying to find something to grab, and the sounds from within were like bats and birds turned up to 1,000. It shivered right on the edge of hearing, and I expected my ears to start bleeding. It was looking for the knob, and I wasn't sure what would happen if it found it. Instead, it bumped into the knocker. It fell off the door. It was only held on by a couple of screws, and as it clattered onto the floor, the most hellish sound of all ripped through the hole before cutting off as suddenly as it had begun. The lights, the noise, and the banging all stopped with a suddenness that made me dizzy. I stood up, looking at the broken door, and walked slowly into the living room to see the extent of the damage. Something was bumping, but I thought maybe the arm had knocked something over. I wanted to make sure the knocker was okay, but as I came around Grandpa's old chair, I saw what was making all the noise. It was the arm that had come through the door. It was leaking black fluid all over the hardwood and flopping around like a fish. It didn't flop for long, but now I'm left with a problem. The portal only seems to open when the knocker is up, but unless it's up, I can't open it. I wonder if this is why Grandpa kept it with him so often. Did he perhaps have a visitor one night when he least expected it? For now, I'm keeping the knocker in my bedside table, but even as I lay here writing this, I can hear it bumping against the wood every now and again. The money will eventually run out. That or my curiosity will get the better of me, and I'll hang the knocker again. But I think for now I'll let it sit. No need to invite trouble if I don't have to.
Have you ever had a dream, maybe a memory from your childhood, so vivid that it almost has to be real? I'm not sure if this actually happened or not, but I've dreamed about it for the last 2 weeks, and I'm terrified that it will never stop. Whenever I close my eyes, it begins again, and each time, it's more vivid than the last. This isn't normal for me. Most days I couldn't tell you what I had for breakfast this morning, much less every detail of the dreams I had last night. But I can tell you every single detail of this event as though it happened just a second ago. It's the most terrifying thing that I've ever seen in my 30 years of life. And if it doesn't stop soon, I don't know what I'll do. I was 8 years old when I knew what terror really was. Miss Winkler was teaching us math, her blackboard covered in numbers and mathematical symbols, when my hand came up, my chubby fingers tickling the sky in anticipation. She'd been trying to engage us for about 45 minutes, enticing slivers of answers out of kids who'd rather be playing outside or pretending to be Power Rangers. When my hand came up, she looked so hopeful. Maybe she thought she had finally reached a student, perhaps. Maybe she thought she'd finally had a breakthrough, and a student would begin to return her answers to her. When she called on me, I can still see the hopeful smile that stretched her painted lips as she said my name with great expectation. Unfortunately, I was about to break her heart. "Can I go to the bathroom, Miss Winkler?" I asked in my high, innocent voice. Her face fell, and as an adult, I can understand that disappointment. "Yes, take the hall pass when you go." The hall pass was a ruler with the word "hall pass" written on it in magic marker. It was smudged from many dirty hands, and as I took it up and left the room, my adult mind wondered how many other hands had touched it over the years. As a kid, all I had wondered about was whether or not I could use it as a convincing lightsaber. I suppose kids do have different priorities, don't they? I swished and buzzed it all the way to the bathroom, and as I came up to the squat little building, I felt nothing besides a need to pee. The brick building was large enough to hold 2 bathrooms, a boys' and a girls', and 4 students comfortably inside each. I remember it being cold and damp in the winter, but I thought it would be mercifully cool on this blistering summer day. As I pushed the door open, I felt cold air ruffle my hair. Today, though, something didn't feel quite right about this place. The darkness was oppressive, pervasive, and even as a child I could feel that something was different.
I reached inside and groped for the light switch. My hand slid over the slimy walls but found nothing. I knew there should be a light switch here, but as I scrambled my hand over the moist tiles, I became more and more aware of how badly I needed to pee. I finally decided to just go use the stall in the dark, the dingy windows letting in enough light that I wouldn't be in complete darkness. The door swung shut behind me. I felt the air pull it closed very hard, and the sound echoed off the bathroom walls. The dingy windows showed me 2 urinals and 2 walled-off toilet stalls. I went into one of the stalls, always feeling more comfortable sitting down to use the bathroom, and got comfortable as my bladder began to empty itself. As I started to do my business, I became aware of the strange noise from the stall next to me. The stalls were made of concrete blocks, painted glossy white, but they were not entirely built into the floor. There was a small opening at the bottom, about a foot high, where you could see into the stall next door. As I sat in the greasy semi-light, I heard the sound like mud dripping onto the floor. Every 5 seconds, it would glop, glop, glop onto the floor. Underneath the sound was another, softer, wetter, heavy breathing that was so low it was almost inaudible. I had finished using the bathroom by this point, but the sound mesmerized me. I had never heard anything like it, and I was fascinated and terrified to see what made a sound like that. Slowly I bent down so I could look under the wall, too afraid to simply go open the stall and see what was in there. As my knees bent to the cold concrete and my hands splayed over the rough floor, I brought my eyes down to peek and saw something that I will never forget. If it was dingy dark in my stall, then it was nearly pitch black in the other. As my eyes adjusted, I could see something on the other side that looked like nothing so much as rippling mud or swaying pudding. It was a mass, a wiggling mass of something that nearly blocked out the entire opening. As I watched, it rippled and shook endlessly as the sound of wet, labored breathing only got louder. Before long, it was more than background noise. It covered the dripping gloop with its damp and difficult chorus. I couldn't look away. I couldn't drag myself away from it until something round and angry floated through the muck and seemed to see me seeing it. It was an eye. I was up in a heartbeat, legs drawn up to my chest as I sat on the toilet and clutched myself. I held the ruler to my chest like a makeshift weapon and tried to silence my growing terror as the breathing became growly and agitated. The door burst open on the other stall, and I thanked my lucky stars that I had remembered to lock the door to my own cubicle before starting my business. Whatever was on the other side banged against the door. It sounded like waves crashing against a levee, and all I could do was cower and try not to scream, worried it might excite the creature and push it to further violence. It slammed in again and again, and as it did, I almost thought I could feel flecks of whatever it was made of slapping off and splatting on the ceiling and floor. It battered the door mercilessly, and to my horror, I could see the simple slide lock joggling and shuddering under every blow. The sound it made was like a mudslide, like mud pushing its way through a hallway during a flood, and I just knew that any minute it would break the door and cover me. Then it stopped. Whatever it was gave one final slap against the door, and then rumbled off out of the bathroom. I sat petrified, unable to move for nearly 5 minutes before I finally found myself able to control my shaking legs. It was gone. Whatever it was gone, but I wanted it to be gone and well gone before I decided to come out. The lock didn't want to open, but it popped open after a few hard slaps with my hand. The door creaked outward on warped hinges, and I could tell that the cubicle door was definitely going to need replacing. As I turned to look at it, I could see several dark stains on the outside where something had slammed its soupy body into it again and again. Something dripped onto my shoulder, and my scream peeled off the walls like a startled bird. I scuttled back on crab legs. My knees had buckled, and I watched as something thick and muddy dripped off the ceiling and fell onto the cracked tile. I looked up to see a dozen or more little stalagmites, or maybe they were stalactites, hanging from the ceiling. They oozed and threatened to fall, their creation having taken place very recently. At that moment, all I wanted to do was get out, to escape, but I should have known that it wouldn't be that easy. When I pushed the door open, it didn't swing out onto the yellowing grass of my school sports field, but onto a shadowy hellscape of swirling lights and acrid smells. My child's mind didn't understand everything, didn't even understand some of the things, but it did understand that there were many moving mountains out there that made the one in the bathroom look like an anthill. The smaller ones congregated around towering fires, the dusty brown earth scraped shiny by their passing, and around them seemed to grind mountains that towered up into the greasy sky. Their tops were illuminated by infrequent forks of lightning. I could see towering rock sentinels made of ever-flowing viscous earth. It was too much. I closed the door and crumpled into a corner between the dripping sink and the wall. I made myself as small as possible. I felt as a bug must feel when it's surrounded by humans, and as my mind tried to process what I had seen, I seemed on the verge of breaking. How could I process something so big without going insane? The smallest of them had been barely able to be contained by this building. The largest of them could have destroyed this building without thinking. My mind could not fathom the sheer size of them, the knowledge of these moving mountains, so I did the only thing I could to keep myself from going insane. I put myself to sleep. The janitor found me there, and when he touched my shoulder, he said I fought and screamed like a cornered animal. He didn't mind, though. He was glad he had found me. It was night when he took me out of the little toilet building, and he had to be very firm with me to get me to go outside into the gloom. I was afraid it was a trick. The dark reminded me of the greasy blackness of that place, and it wasn't until my mother saw us coming out and ran to me that I knew I was back where I belonged. They took me to the principal's office. My dad, my teacher, the principal, the police officers, they were all waiting there for me. My dad hugged me, folding me into his warm embrace, and my teachers and principals asked me where I had been. When the janitor said he had found me in the toilet, my teacher seemed confused, and the police seemed aggravated. "You said you searched the entire school," said the principal, not just to my teacher, but also to the police officers. "We did. We even brought the dogs in. There's no way that kid's been in the bathroom for 2 days. My face must have shown how confused I was as I tried my best to follow the explanation. They told me I'd been missing for 2 days. The school had been searched, a code Adam had been ongoing, and they had searched every place I liked and every friend's house I'd ever been to. I tried to tell them about the monsters, about the weird world full of giant things, but they just shook their heads and said I must have been hiding this whole time. I think my parents were just happy that I was safe, and the principal didn't punish me, even though I sensed that he really wanted to. I think my teacher believed me when I told her I wasn't hiding, holding the hall pass out to her in a shaky hand. She knew I was a good kid, and didn't usually cause more than the average 8-year-old's amount of trouble. She quit the next year, and I was removed from her class at my parents' request. When she saw me in the halls after that, I could swear that she looked almost sad to see me. I haven't thought about that place in years. After it happened, my parents took me to see a psychiatrist, and she helped me put it out of my mind. I would only remember it sometimes in the dark hours of the night, but it was gone just as quickly, even though it comes back in vivid detail, and I don't know how much longer I can handle it. I see the mountains moving as I stand in the doorway of that bathroom. I know that they will end me if they see me. I know that if they see a way to our world, they will end all of us, and I'm afraid of what I'll see the next time I open that door.